One. Hello, everyone. Thanks for watching. I'm David Hopper, Austin Bureau Chief of 360degreesound.com. Over the last 5 years, we've been doing a series called Author Talk, where we bring readers and viewers exclusive interviews with authors of new music-related books. Today, I'm joined by Cleveland-based music journalist Annie Zaleski, author of the new book, We Found Love, Song by Song, the stories behind 100 romantic hits. Annie is also the author of illustrated biographies on Lady Gaga and Pink, Duran Duran's Rio for the 33 and a third series, and Taylor Swift, the stories behind the songs. You can find our interviews with Annie for all of those books on 360degreesound.com. Annie, welcome back to 360. Thanks for joining us to talk about your new book, We Found Love, Song by Song.
Thanks for having me.
Uh, Here it is, everyone. We Found Love, Song by Song. Annie, I wonder if you could please start by telling us how the idea for this book came to be.
A couple years ago, I put out a book called This is Christmas, Song by Song. So I talked about basically the stories behind 100 Christmas songs. And the publisher was said, "Hey, we're also looking to put out this book on the best love songs of all time. Are you interested?" And I was like, "Oh my goodness, absolutely." And so, yeah, that's how it came about. And they're a great, great partner. And so I really love working with them. So it was a no-brainer.
Yes. Well, love is probably the most common topic for a song. You had literally thousands and thousands of songs to choose from. Talk about the challenge of narrowing it down to 100, and what were some of your considerations when selecting the songs for the book?
That is nails it right there is, trying to figure out how only 100. And it was a big challenge, honestly. Part of it was, looking at that, when you look at some of these songs, you think are love songs. When you actually read the lyrics, they're not. So it actually took a little bit longer because I had some things on the list and I don't remember what they are offhand now. But I was like, I'm reading it. I'm like, oh, that is not a love song. Okay, so we actually can't include that. And so, that's one of the reasons why in the book there's some auxiliary lists of things like top 10 love songs, like your top 10 songs that aren't love songs, because I ran into so many things and I'm like, okay, we need some, to have the backstories behind, misunderstood songs. But in general, what I tried to do was look at songs from different eras and look from songs from different styles, in different eras. Or I mentioned that already, but I mean, I guess different, I didn't want to have necessarily, 20 songs from, 1965, for example. And so it was a lot of sort of, putting together a spreadsheet and then just sort of balancing and trying to make sure, they're the love songs that everyone knows, the ones that are, the classic ones that you always need to have on there, and then kind of balancing out with, songs that maybe are a little bit newer that have sort of risen to love song status, or just kind of some songs that maybe people had forgotten about, or some, real classic songs that maybe had really interesting stories that you didn't know about. And so, yeah, it's a whole bunch of different things, but it's definitely much more complicated than you might think.
Hmm. Yeah. So in general, what do you think are some common components of a great love song? Like
Yeah.
what are some things that makes a great love song?
I mean, it really, first off, it is the lyrics. When you kind of look at things, you know, I mean, and love is one thing, right? And so trying to figure out a way to talk about that in a creative way can get challenging after a while. I mean, without it sounding, maybe too syrupy or maybe too, sort of like, eye rolling. And so talking about love in a good way, or in a clever way or a really interesting way, is difficult. And so kind of looking there, but then also musically, I think, there were some really, and love songs take many forms, but there's lovely orchestration, for example, a really sweet melody, a vocal delivery that's tender and sensitive and genuine. You definitely want someone singing that, to believe it. You don't want someone singing that you're like, I don't really think they're in love, so there's things like that. Um, but then also just in general, just kind of the heartfeltness of it, and honesty. But that being said, it's very interesting that, love is, as they say, it's a many splendored thing, but it's also a very diverse thing. So, you have love of, friends, you have love of family. You have this feeling of love and, love for someone, maybe they don't reciprocate a crush, maybe you're longing. And so love is also very, more diverse than you might think. And so that also made it a challenge, a fun challenge to put together the book, but also to kind of look at the different ways you can write a love song. And so, yeah, so it's interesting.
Mhm. Yeah. What was an example of maybe one of the more unique love songs in the book? Perhaps one that doesn't have some of the usual tropes or cliches, and what made that song special?
I mean, I think one of them that comes to mind, it's funny, is Don't You Forget About Me and by Simple Minds. And I think everyone is very familiar with that song. It was in the Breakfast Club. It was really Simple Minds' breakthrough song. And when you actually look at it, it was meant as a song about friendship. And when you think about where it is in the movie, you're like, okay, that makes sense. But it had somehow never occurred to me that it was written about friends. And I was like, oh, so it was very sweet and it really kind of changed the meaning for me. Now, when I listen to the song, I think about it sort of in a different way. I also think if I want to know what love is by Foreigner. Mick Jones came up with that and had this on this tape like in the middle of the night. And he was almost embarrassed to play it for Lou Gramm, which was wild to think about. He was almost kind of like shy about it. And that's a song that when you think about it, I mean, it really sums up like, oh my goodness, it's, in the middle of the night and I'm having these really big feelings I don't know what to do with. I'm a little bit desolate. I'm a little bit despondent. And so that was another one. And obviously there's a beautiful gospel choir too that's in that. And so that's just another one that you're like, okay, that's a little bit of a different take on love. You know, it's it's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Well, as you mentioned earlier, the book goes in chronological order. So you have some older tunes at the beginning, so some standards. And one that you included is the George Gershwin tune, "Love Is Here to Stay," which is one of my personal favorites of his. I believe it was the last or one of the last songs he wrote before his untimely death in the 30s of a brain tumor. But I was wondering what you love about that particular song "Love Is Here to Stay" and why you decided to go with the Billie Holiday rendition.
Yeah. I mean, I think, for starters, just, the Gershwins, like they need like no, introduction in terms of just their writing and, their interplay, musically and lyrically. And so that one definitely because it's a classic. And just because it's very, not that, it's simple exactly, but they are also so economical. And I think that's one of the things actually that I kind of discovered in some of these love songs is that when you frame them in a way that makes you don't necessarily need to be flowery. You don't need to necessarily be really overdone. It says what it needs to say, and that's it. And also it's clever in the fact that it rhymes. And I know that that's silly to say, but like when you actually look at it, it rhymes in a way that's not really makes you roll your eyes. It's a way that's it makes sense that it was in it was. It's so theatrical is because it just has a real sort of lilt to it. And I just really love that, and the fact that, the imagery of, maybe mountains will crumble and maybe other things will, that you think are solid are going to tumble down. But we're rock solid. Like I think that's just a really simple but poignant sort of image. And why, I chose, that was one of the other things that I tried to really do was balance also artists because, and I ran into this with my Christmas book as well. There could have been, a million songs by Frank Sinatra. We could have probably done just a love songs by Frank Sinatra book themselves. So I wanted to have kind of a little bit of diversity and especially with vocalists and things like that.
Mhm.
So that's why.
Right. Um, let's see. Yeah, another classic song in the book is Otis Redding's "Try a Little Tenderness," which you write, quote, begins like a church hymn and evolves into a cathartic soul number. I really love his rendition. That was, of course, a very old song that he kind of redid and made it his own. I would say that's probably one of the more remarkable reinventions in pop music history, huh? But what do you think about "Try a Little Tenderness"?
Oh, absolutely. And that was another case where it's like, okay, I need to make sure I have Otis in there because, he has such a tragically short career, but he was just such like the his output was just so, he's such an amazing vocalist. Like you just, and so and th this one in particular, I mentioned that, he had that performance of it on Upbeat, right before he passed. And it's just he's just giving his all, right? Like he is just, he is living that song and he is feeling that song. And the lyrics themselves and deserve that, right? Because, the idea of try a little tenderness, like, if you're feeling like abrasive, if you're feeling like you want to act in some way, soften yourself. Like I love that image. And he just really captured that in such a careful way and in such a sincere way and in such a remarkable way. And that's why, and like you said, like the reinvention was just amazing. And so that's, one of the reasons why I love that song.
Mhm. Yeah. Uh, Fast forward to the back to the 80s, in the entry on Berlin's "Take My Breath Away," which
Yeah.
was, of course, the love theme from Top Gun. Uh, I found that one very interesting because you wrote about how Berlin singer Terry Nunn had some acting experience and that helped her vocal performance in the song. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And and the song is so interesting because, she obviously gave an amazing performance in this, but it was one of those things that most of the members of Berlin just did not like how the song basically came out because they were sort of pushed to the side because it's sort of, it was such a showcase for Terry. And which is such a bummer. But yeah, but no, Terry was, and people don't necessarily realize in terms of her background because I think she this that came out in what 1986 at that point. And Giorgio Moroder wrote it, which is actually kind of funny because when you listen to it, I think you're also used to Giorgio Moroder having these very propulsive songs. You think of Never Ending Story and you think of the Blondie songs he did. But Terry Nunn, it was sort of almost a little bit restrained. But yeah, her background, like, basically, she obviously, famously auditioned for Princess Leia, for example, and did not get it. But she totally had like TV show cameos. Like you can look at pretty much like, 70s and 80s sitcoms and she pops up here and there. And so she really put herself in the shoes of that, of the lead character of that song. That was basically just, deeply romantic and just really, this deep sense of longing. And, her interpretation of it was just something else. We talk about like kind of really giving her all and really living that song. I mentioned that with Otis, and she does the same thing. And it was so different for Berlin too. I think people forget that, they were very new wavy. They were very sort of, you think of the Metro and things like that, that were very, very electropop. And this was definitely, a big swooping power ballad from the 1980s movie soundtrack. So it was definitely different.
Mhm. Yeah. As I mentioned earlier, you have a book out on the songs of Taylor Swift. Taylor Swift, the stories behind the songs.
Mhm.
The book We Found Love has one song by Taylor Swift, her 2008 hit "Love Story." I was wondering why you decided to choose that Swift song for the one to include in this book.
So it's funny, I could have picked a lot of Taylor Swift songs because she has so many really interesting love songs. But what really stood out to me is like that song has basically become, especially on the Eras tour, the song that people do marriage proposals to. And like it's like, TikTok, all over social media. There's a line in there about Romeo and Juliet, and and there's a line about pull out your ring and said, "Marry me, Juliet." And the amount of videos of people doing that exact same thing during that line of the song are just like countless, dozens and dozens and dozens. And I was like, you know what? There's something about that song then, And I mean, obviously, Romeo and Juliet is such a that is such a famous, ill-fated love story. But she basically, turns it around and makes it a happy ending. So the marriage proposal is Romeo and Juliet, rather than having these really terrible, sad ends, have their happy ending. And I kind of love that, and she wrote it. And basically, it's funny because she's talked later about how that song in particular, she was sort of imagining what a happy ending might be. It was based on there was a guy that she wanted to date that her family and people did not want to let her date. And so she wrote this kind of aspirational song, which is funny. But yeah, and it was, it's a very romantic song, and it just is really one of those that's just really very sweet. And that's I think a very early example too of her being able to fictionalize real moments to really make these unique songs.
Hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Uh, of course, you include Rihanna's 2011 hit "We Found Love," which is the title of the book. What was it your idea to title the book after that song?
It's funny. I think it was my publisher's idea to name it after it. And honestly, I think I love it. I think that makes perfect sense. You could have done a whole bunch of different things, but the idea of, we found love in a hopeless place. And I just think that really sums up so many love songs that, that you are, everything might be tough, and maybe even like you with your particular potential partner, things might be difficult, but we're persevering anyway. And there's so many songs that are like that. It's us against the world. And so I think that one, it really kind of summed that up. Even though it was funny because it didn't really have, out of all the songs with the stories, it maybe didn't have as much of a lengthy story as kind of other hits, but it just really, I think it just really summed up the book really well.
Hmm. Yeah, great song. I hope she makes more music. I don't.
I
I know
know.
we've been been talking about it, but we'll see. It seems like it's been a while since the last one, and anti, but yeah, I know she's been busy. Um, so yeah, yeah. I guess finally, what would be your pitch to our viewers and readers who may be interested in picking up the book? We Found Love, song by song.
Yeah. Well, first off, Valentine's Day is soon. It's in February. Also, we're getting into wedding season. So I think for both of those different things, it's a great kind of stocking stuffer, and it's a kind of a nice kind of, gift you could potentially buy. But I think again, I think you'll really learn something from it. I think a lot of the stories will surprise you, and I think you'll see a lot of these songs in a new light. And I think no matter, even if you're not necessarily super romantic, I think there'll definitely be some songs in there that'll soften your heart a little bit, that'll make you see those things in a new light, and maybe want to turn it on, turn on the music and listen to it a little bit more. I think it's also a good book to kind of read for, it's, hang out at home, and read it with your special someone. So I think it can also be good too. So
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Great. Thank you so much, Andy, for joining 360degreesound.com again.
thanks for having me.
Take care.